Welcome to Bedroom Forensics. Today we're talking about digital forensics. Now that means looking into the computers, into mobile phones, and figuring out how a crime was committed. Now, I'm not going to start talking about it. I've got an expert here to tell me exactly what goes on within a digital forensic crime investigation. So over to Jason. Jason, thank you so much for joining me today, all the way from South Africa over there. Obviously, you do a lot of digital forensics. You teach it. You're an expert. But what actually got you interested in the first place? It's such a, are you a bit of a nerd, a secret nerd?
Yeah, well, I wouldn't even say a secret nerd. I'd say I'm like an alpha nerd, like like a real nerd's nerd. I mean, when I grew up in the, I was a child of the 80s. I wasn't born in the 80s, but obviously I spent most of my sort of teenage years in the 80s. Obviously, the best decade ever, because had the best music, and British pop, and everything was the rage back then. Obviously, I got into the sort of microcomputer revolution quite early. Obviously, with South Africa being very close to the UK, most of us trace a lot of our origins back to the UK. We had computers like the Sinclair ZX81s and all those type of computers that were quite popular in the UK at the time. That's how I got into computers. And I absolutely loved it. I was like the super nerd, I was programming, I was hacking, I was doing whatever I wanted to do, kind of thing. And it was absolutely great. And unfortunately, I kind of grew up during the sort of apartheid years in South Africa. So obviously not the best time to be alive. And one of the negative drawbacks of that was that you had conscripted national service. So you had to do compulsory military service. Now, look, I have no problem with people in the military. I've got a lot of friends, especially in the UK and the US, that are in the military at the moment. And I have no problem with that, but I'm not a soldier. I don't think I'm made to do to do that. So a friend of mine actually said to me, so well, why don't you join the police? You've always wanted to go do computer science and things along those lines. If you join the police, you've got to do double the amount of national service, but you get paid well. It's a decent salary, and they'll give you a bursary to go and study. And I thought, oh, this is brilliant. I can go do my national service. I don't have to do anything crazy or weird. I can go do my BSc, and well, great. And when I was in police college, I actually found that I had a pretty decent knack for investigations. And what happened was kind of very rare, is that I got recruited straight out of police college to go and work for the South African Police's commercial branch. Now, the best sort of comparison that I can talk of from a UK perspective is the police's commercial branch is almost like a cross between the Serious Fraud Office in the UK and the cross between the Metropolitan Police's fraud squad. So it was kind of a amalgamation. And obviously, with me being the sort of computer nerd, if a case came in that sort of remotely looked like it had a computer involved, I mean, when I say remotely looked like it had a computer involved, I'm talking about if a counterfeit check had been printed on a dot matrix printer, I got the case file because there was some computer used in doing this thing. So it's kind of weird in the sense that I'd always loved science, and I kind of accidentally fell into this investigation detective kind of approach. And then that coupled with my my love of computers and things along those lines. And that was absolutely just sort of, I kind of fell into it. And obviously I combined my love of computers with my love of investigation, and I started reaching out to people around the world. I mean, at that stage, for example, we had just recently done a joint investigation with detectives from Scotland Yard. It was a counterfeiting of currency case where the counterfeiters were in my home city. They'd printed a whole bunch of counterfeit South African currency. They shipped it over to London. They then basically used the counterfeit currency there to exchange in the bags for British pounds. So it was this whole joint investigation. And it was at that stage that I first got to effectively talk to another detective from the Met who was doing computer stuff. I mean, it wasn't, we didn't even have computer forensic units back in those days. It was just normal detectives doing computer stuff. And obviously he put me in contact with people in the FBI, and we slowly built out these kind of initial networks, and that's kind of how I got into it. And just sort of one thing led to another. Eventually, my sort of first degrees were in criminal justice. Then I went back and did a BSc degree in computer science. Then I did my master's in computer science. I'm now busy doing my PhD in computer science. And I haven't looked back since. It's been absolutely an amazing journey.
Gosh, that sounds incredible. It sounds also like you're the reason why a lot of the process has been put in place. Because I know here in the UK, the reason that we started going down the digital forensics route was also because of fraud, because it's always about the money, 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 isn't
Exactly.
it? Especially if you can go from A to B. And obviously things have evolved since you started. Things like blockchains trying to stop that fraud happening. Obviously now you're still doing a lot of investigations. You've got your own company now. So what can you give me a little bit of an insight into, I mean, this is really sweeping here,
That's all
about
good.
what you do on like a case by case. Give me a case, some like popular cases that you do.
So we obviously do all sorts of cases, whether, I mean, it literally can run the ambit from, like at the moment, we've got a case of somebody that's been cyber stalked, helping the police with that kind of investigation, right the way through to like really complex data breaches. I mean, one of the cases we're working on at the moment is a massive national data breach where over 25 million individuals' records have actually been compromised as a result of the breach. We obviously I still work a lot with the local authorities, both the police and the regulators in different regulatory environments, and obviously we do a lot of work internationally as well. So we do work with governments in Europe. We do work with governments in the Middle East. It's kind of pardon me. It's actually quite nice. But coming to a typical case. I mean, I suppose it's difficult to say what is a typical case, but I can kind of talk you through the mindset. So obviously one of the first things in any digital forensics engagement, like in any forensic engagement, is you've got to understand the allegations of what's being investigated. What is the suspicion of what's happened, and you approach that, for lack of a better term, that crime scene like you would any crime scene. You have an allegation that something's taken place, and you walk into that environment with a very objective, open mind to evaluate the evidence that you see. And based on the evaluation of the evidence, you'll build up a hypothesis. And then obviously you'll test that hypothesis to see whether or not the evidence is valid. You obviously go through the whole null hypothesis. You basically try and disprove your own hypothesis from a scientific perspective and come up with an answer. So it doesn't matter whether it's a really complex hacking case or it's for lack of a better term, a simplistic cyber stalking case. You still go through the same processes. So, one of the key things, and I think a lot of people that are doing digital forensics don't always necessarily think about this, is it's all about asking the right questions right at the beginning of the investigation. It's one of the things that I've seen personally, and it's not just that I see just in South Africa. I mean, this is around the world in terms of people doing digital forensics. With the prevalence of commercial tools that are out there, people have got very much into this, what I like to refer to as this push button forensics culture, where they use a particular tool, they push a button, it gets them some results. But the investigations become more about using the tools rather than asking the right questions and then selecting the appropriate tools to get the answers. So that's what I think one of the big things at the moment is actually just getting people to ask the right questions. So like I'll use an example of a case that we're busy with at the moment. Obviously, I won't mention it because it's an ongoing investigation. But here we have which is effectively a standard business email compromise. So here we have an organization, a fairly big business, and the chief financial officer of the business gets an email allegedly from the chief executive officer saying, by the way, you need to pay X clients this amount. Here's the banking details. And of course, the email actually comes from the CEO. So it's not even a spoofed email. It actually comes from that CEO's email account. So you go into the investigation and you start asking those questions. So how is this possible? When did it happen? Had he been logged in? You ask all those kind of questions. So, initially we start with an investigation like that, looking at the accounts that are involved. tracing all of the activity on the accounts, effectively reconstructing the activity of that person over a period of time. And if you look in this particular case, they were using a Microsoft 365 instance on their back end. And the first thing we did is we looked at what we call the unified audit logs within Microsoft. And this basically gives us 90 days of historical access to every single transaction on those accounts. And we could actually see the logins, but the logins were coming from identified Tor exit nodes. So Tor is basically, it stands for the onion router. It's an anonymizing network. When people talk about the dark web, that's kind of what they're talking about. They're kind of talking about people using the Tor network. And basically what happened is these attackers were logging in. They were diverting emails. They were actually logging in as the CEO. They sent the emails to the chief financial officer. And that's kind of the starting point, the first clue, the first breadcrumb in the investigation. So now you got to see, well, okay, this account was compromised. Let's look historically, how was this account compromised? So now we look at the logs, we do a forensic examination on his machine, we reconstruct the history on his machine, and ultimately we found out that he had received a phishing email, hadn't realized it was a phishing email, clicked on the links, and the attackers effectively had compromised his credentials. Obviously we could trace everything back to a certain point, and obviously the digital forensics is only part of the problem, or part of the case investigation, because there obviously was a financial aspect. We had to trace the money transactions and the EFTs and things along those lines. But at the end of the day, the whole investigation was clearly an organized crime group that was involved. I mean, the money had moved out in 3 different tranches. So it basically bumped through 2 intermediaries in South Africa before it left the country. 2 of the tranches went to Germany, if I remember, and 1 went to Canada. So I mean, even the incoming attacks that we detected were all over the place. I mean, we had attacks coming in from Nigeria, we had attacks coming from Canada, from Austria, from Germany, from Amsterdam. So you literally, that's the lovely thing with digital forensics, is you can literally reconstruct the crime scene. I mean, again, being an old detective, I've studied normal crime scene techniques and things along those lines, and applying normal forensics. Our job is to reconstruct, but it's always kind of a best guess in physical crime scene techniques. Whereas with the digital stuff, you've got so many data points, you can actually reconstruct fairly accurately what's happened. And that's so flipping cool. It's like, I have no other way of actually describing that. It's just so flipping cool.
I mean, obviously, like, the language of digital forensics is a language of its own. So having your expertise, you can see everything what's going on, and it's like an international language, isn't it? But we're talking about like tours there. I know that for a fact that people are starting to do that, go into the dark web and on their own personal devices. People aren't seeing that as it's anything that's kind of secret anymore, and a lot of people are starting to try themselves to kind of not necessarily get money any way they can, but experimenting. Are you finding that these people like out there are it's not a secret anymore? It's just crime gangs. It's like
I mean, what a lot of people forget is that Tor wasn't. I mean, Tor was developed by the U.S. Navy. It was developed as a privacy communications protocol for military applications. So, you could have 2 separate components, like military components on other sides of the world, and they could communicate with each other via the internet effectively in a completely secure manner with full encryption and full data privacy. So the concept was absolutely brilliant. And if I look at a lot of countries where there have been, like where the governments are very authoritarian and very draconian and are sort of cracking down on their civilian populations, look at like what had happened in North Africa, in like Libya and all of those places during the Arab Spring. These were massive crackdowns. How we got information out from activists was through Tor. So there's a lot of positive spin on it, but obviously, like anything in the world, I mean, when the Wright brothers developed planes, nobody thought that 100 years later people would be using them as missiles and flying them into buildings. That was it was kind of inconceivable. So I think that's kind of what's happened with Tor, is that criminals have cottoned onto it because of the privacy capabilities of it. But at the same token, a lot of ordinary people are using it as well, because people are worried about surveillance, government, Big Brother watching them. So it's become a lot more mainstream, if that makes sense. It's maybe still not at the level where the casual user that's used to using, like, I'm just going to go fire up a Microsoft browser and do it. Probably not quite there yet, but it's definitely it's no longer the specialized thing. More people are aware of it. People are aware of the privacy implications and things along those lines. So we are seeing legitimate uses of it as well.
Well, that's kind of giving people, say, like cyber stalkers or people who are trolling, giving them like an extra level of what they suggest they think is privacy. When it comes to your investigations, you talked about like a simpler case being cyber stalking, but if someone is aware of like having these privacy levels, does that make your job a bit harder?
It makes it incredibly difficult. And I remember on one of your episodes you'd spoken about CSI Cyber. So this is my CSI Cyber moment. I agree with you. I love the actors, but like a lot of the stuff is not very realistic. It's like if somebody's using Tor, it really does compromise our investigations. And from a forensic science point of view, it limits the amount of evidence that we have available to collect. But it doesn't mean that our investigations are over, because we can revert to other investigative techniques. We could use sting operations. We could do undercover work. A lot of us that are doing these kind of investigations have multiple online personas. Like there's always that joke that that 16-year-old girl that you're talking to on the internet is actually like a 40-year-old FBI agent. And that's it's still one of those things where we will often do undercover operations online to try and identify the attackers that way. Does it make our jobs more difficult? Yes. Does it make it impossible? No. And I think that's kind of, for me, the important message is, and again, that sounds simplistic, but I'm a firm believer in the Locard principle. Every connection leaves a trace. So there is always evidence somewhere. And here's the thing, that even if, let's just say, from looking at the Tor communications, I can't necessarily identify who the attacker is from that. If through other investigative techniques, I can identify a probable attacker, and then let's just say with the authorities, we execute a warrant on that residence, we find the computer. Well, you know what? Now I've got something that I can use. So I genuinely believe there's no such thing as there's never any evidence. There's always evidence. Sometimes you've just got to look a lot harder and dig a lot deeper to find it, but there's always some kind of evidence there.
Which brings me to another point, because obviously we see a lot in like crime TV shows, not necessarily the dreaded CSI Cyber, but people, we know now that you can't delete something off a phone and it's gone forever, because this is out there in the world. I mean, like recently there's going to be the royals, the Duchess of Sussex, for example, she has to give her emails and phone over. So deleting isn't going to get rid of like the evidence. But so does that make it, you mentioned earlier about people worrying about Big Brother, does this make it like, if you can never delete something, that maybe we are getting checked? Or do you come across people who are a bit worried about that kind of stuff?
So I'm going to address like 2 points. So firstly, there is a level of paranoia. And literally, I've done cases where people literally believe that their Wi-Fi routers were spying on them, or that their satellite TV was beaming things into their brain. I mean, like, really, there are some crazy people out there. But hey, we live in a world where people still think the Earth is flat and all that kind of stuff as well. So very unscientific. But the other thing you raise is this thing that you can't ever delete something. Well, it's a yes and no answer. So if I delete something, it's potentially recoverable, but if I overwrite it, it's not recoverable. So think back to a good old VHS tape, kind of thing. I usually use this analogy quite often when I'm testifying in court, because obviously the judges are kind of at that generation that that they still remember recording television programs on VHS cassettes, because they didn't have like TiVo and all those kind of things that we have today. And I'd say to them, so, well, like when you delete a file, that the physical space on that hard drive that file occupied still has that data there. The data hasn't magically disappeared. But if you overwrite it with new data, you can't recover the data that was previously there, because it's been overwritten with new data. So, I would use the analogy of, your worship, you watched, you went to record at Dallas, and Dallas was an hour long, and, and then a couple of days later, you recorded Who's the Boss, or, pick your favorite 80s sitcom. And, and then what happened? You'd watch that program, and what happened at the end of that program? Well, there'd be some fuzz on the screen, and then I'd see what was left of Dallas. Well, that's exactly what we mean. I can't see the first part of Dallas anymore because I've overwritten it. So what we're seeing a lot of with really sophisticated attackers is that they're using techniques of wiping the data. So it's not just deleting the data, they physically overwriting the deleted data with other data to prevent us from actually recovering it. But we do have techniques that still allow us to get the data back, because there's lots of places where you can get evidence. So again, it makes our job a bit more difficult, that you can actually delete data. The trick is that most people don't understand their own environment sufficiently enough, their own computer environment, to actually realize how many places data is actually stored on the system. So you wipe what you think is the data storage, and you are wiping a portion of it, but there will be remnants of it in potentially other areas. So the best way I can think of it is, think of it like physical trace evidence. What you're getting at a digital level is you're getting trace evidence of the original data, and that trace evidence might be enough trace to actually be able to extrapolate what the original core evidence was. And the other thing with deletion as well, and again, it's pretty much like coming to a physical crime scene. If you go to a physical crime scene and you can immediately smell bleach, and I know you were a former CSI yourself, and as you get to a crime scene, you smell bleach, you spray luminol on, there's a big glowy patch on the floor, and you know there was blood there, there was bleach there, but because they've used bleach, they've destroyed the blood and they've destroyed the DNA, so you can't do any of that. But the evidence of the fact that they destroyed evidence becomes evidence. So it's the same thing we have in digital forensics. Even if somebody wipes the evidence, there will be evidence of the thing that wiped the evidence. So we have evidence of the wiping. So we still have some evidence to use.
I get that, exactly that. I mean, there's also like the void, isn't there? Like if you can see something that was meant to be there that's not there, then you're asking new questions. Which comes back to your original point where you're saying, are you asking the right questions?
Exactly.
It all comes down to working together through an investigation. I mean, you mentioned a few times during our chats about Microsoft as well. Obviously, you do a lot with Windows, don't you?
Yeah.
And you're a bit of an expert on that front.
So I'm always hesitant to use the word expert. Now, I'll tell you why. It's a personal pet peeve of mine. Obviously, I testify a lot in court, and the court will award me the status or the title of expert, if that makes sense. But I feel very weird to call myself an expert. I like to refer to myself as a specialist, because if I've learned anything in the sort of almost 22 years that I've been doing digital forensics now, is that the more I learn, the less I actually know. It's weird that way. But in terms of Microsoft, I specifically teach Windows forensics as one of the classes I teach for the SANS Institute. So we have done a lot of research, into Microsoft and the type of forensic artifacts that are there. There's a lot of scientific experimentation that goes on in the back end. So I like to think I'm fairly proficient when it comes to Microsoft. But then that being said, we're still learning new things every day, because Microsoft will bring out a new version of Windows and we're learning something new about it. So it's exciting in the sense that you never actually know it all, which is pretty cool.
Also a little bit frustrating, isn't it, though? Because it's like you want to kind of push those boundaries, especially with a company like Microsoft, because they have people in there that are trying to push boundaries and hack their own stuff and make sure that the security is up to scratch. And obviously that's across all of the companies. I'm not necessarily
Exactly.
Zoom, even though we're on it right now.
Well, like Zoom is pretty secure. Everybody made a big song and dance about Zoom, but we use Zoom, and I wouldn't be using Zoom if it wasn't secure. So,
Well, that's gives
but
me
like
a
any,
little to breathe.
but like any system, it is prone to failure. I mean, there's nothing perfect in the world, so you just have to accept the risk that comes with it.
And also, I think a lot of the failures come from human use. I think it's a big
Exactly.
part of the phishing exercise that you mentioned.
Yeah.
That case, that was because somebody pressed a link, and the same
Exactly.
with a lot of things. And I think it's taking that human behavior into account, because we can never, even investigations, you can never say logically A to B to C, because someone's in there getting their hands dirty in it.
But that's the thing, is that investigation is a messy business. Look, I'm a forensic scientist, and I would love to be able to say that you can reduce an investigation to an algorithm, but the reality is you can't. I mean, crime is a human phenomenon. So humans commit crimes. Technology doesn't commit crimes. And a lot of people forget that when it comes to digital forensics. But people commit crimes, just the same as people investigate those crimes. People, like that old saying, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. You'll have people who are not forensic specialists. Something will happen, and they think they're doing something with the best of intentions, and invariably end up trampling all over the crime scene. The human variable big problem in forensic science in general. And I think that is also one of the reasons why we've been pushing across all the forensic disciplines for better regulation, better standards. I mean, I know, for example, with the forensic science regulator in the UK, I know she's been pushing very, very strongly to actually have regulated legislative regulatory powers. At the moment, it's still that self-regulatory regime. And that's the problem, unless you have something that says this is the standard and everybody needs to meet the standard. I mean, this is the weirdest thing. I mean, I can't go to a doctor that doesn't meet a standard, but I can put my life in the hands of a forensic scientist who doesn't have to meet a standard. Like that's a bit counterproductive how that works.
I think that's the same with quite a lot of generic, not just in forensic science and just, but like the guidelines, because they're so movable as well. It's kind of like, when do you put down, this is how this investigation has to go, because that's now going to change.
Yeah.
And I know obviously you mentioned there in the UK that it's now all in one department, which is real. Yeah. It should have been like that from the beginning, but whatever. Things are moving to the benefit. But things are changing. There was one of the former Reddit CEOs, or whatever they're called at the top, said that he was developing an algorithm using AI that would push through all of their social media and take out what they didn't like. I'm really paraphrasing that, but it seems quite scary in that sense. It's like the Great Reset, New World Order is going to be based on AI and infiltration. I mean, what do you see that to help or hinder your investigation?
So here's the thing, and I mean, so I've got a lot of friends that are involved in machine learning and AI developments and things along those lines. And I don't profess to be a specialist in it, but I follow the literature, fairly well. And if you can reduce something to an algorithm, machine learning and AI certainly can play a role. But we haven't got to the point of view when it comes to AI to have true sentience. And I know this kind of like sounds very like sci-fi-ish kind of thing, but when you're doing an investigation, so I've done a lot of research into inductive and deductive reasoning and thinking and critical thinking. It's very much part of the whole investigative process. You can teach a machine to do deductive thinking. So in other words, A plus B equals C. That's a common algorithm. But we don't yet have the ability to train a machine to do inductive thinking. And that's learning from your entire life experience, being able to, so if you think of yourself as a human being as a sensory collection platform, so you have your five senses, you're constantly taking data in, your mind is processing all that data. You are making inductive decisions based on your whole historical context with everything else that you know. So when you're doing an investigation, let's just say you're interviewing somebody and you have that gut feel that somebody's lying to you, there's no deductive thought process that's developing it. It's your inductive reasoning that's developing it. That's why they will often say that forensic science is half science and half art. And for me, that's one of the things. So yeah, do I believe that machine learning and AI may help us in some areas? I think so. It might help us get to certain things quicker, but it's never going to replace that inductive reasoning ability of a human being. And that's such a key part, again, because we're talking about the human variable. The human variable is, as much as I'd like to say we are deductive creatures, we are far more inductive creatures than we are deductive. That's why we fall in love with the wrong people and things along those lines. If we just followed logic, we would like, okay, I'm not dating that one, I'm not dating that one, kind of thing. But we don't. We don't apply our rational mind to those kind of inductive reasoning things. But that inductive reasoning is why. It's why you get that feeling in your gut not to cross the street at a particular point in time, because you haven't actually realized that your hearing, even though you've not registered, is hearing the truck barreling down the road and not slowing down, and is warning you not to act. So yeah, I suppose it's a bit of a long-winded answer, but I don't think AI or machine learning is going to change things. It will help us, but I don't think it's going to do away with us. So I think I've got good job security for a while.
I think most things, it's not there to replace humans, because as you rightly say, there's just too much that we can bring to anything really that even machines can't yet. It's just that these are things that people are already thinking about, like how can we get what we don't like out there or what we do like out there through AI and pushing it. And
well, that's the manipulation issue, and that's actually quite concerning, because there's a book, and I'm trying to remember the name of it. Future Crime. Very, very, very good book if you're interested in sort of futurism. And the way they talk about things like manipulation and mimetic warfare and things along those lines. What a few years ago we were talking about, like psychological operations from a military perspective. Now we're talking about legitimate influence operations. You look at the Cambridge Analytica scandal, a few years ago. If you have access to data, you have the ability to influence the narrative. And again, I get frustrated. Like as a scientist, for me, it's about the science. And when I look at what we're seeing in the popular media, for example, I'm like, how the hell is this even an issue? This is where is the scientific rationality? But then you look at the narratives and how algorithms are being used to drive a particular narrative, and we almost creating these echo chambers that have effectively been funneled by machine learning and AI kind of scenario. So it's scary. It's really scary.
Oh gosh, yeah, 100%. And the fact that you can get paid bots, which are an algorithm of their own, and they can interact in a way that looks like they're sentient.
Exactly.
But actually, it's all via like a machine. I mean, the futurism of the world, it is kind of a bit like, where are we going with this? Like, what is our ultimate goal? Because ultimately, shouldn't we try and just live peacefully? And if there's any crime, let's get the investigation going, rather than thinking how can we all control each other. I mean, that's what I think.
I'm still looking forward to the day where ultimately I get called in to do a murder investigation because some robot has gone crazy and I'm doing forensics on the robot brain to figure out what screw was loose in it, kind of thing. I know that's really a disturbing thought, but that would be a cool investigation to do.
Isn't that movie with Will Smith? Isn't that movie?
Like I Robot, yeah. So I have a bit of a joke for you. So in South Africa we have 11 official languages, and one of them is a language called isiXhosa. So I Robot. So if you say e-robot, it's like one robot. So we had a joke in South Africa with that movie I Robot. So it was e-robot, but the movie was actually I'm a robot, lots of robots.
And that's what you want the future to be, full of many robots.
Yeah, many robots.
Well, Jason, before before I let you go, I just want to, obviously, like, you have a website where people can come
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
speak to you and get their investigations going. So can you just like tell our listeners, where can they
So,
get
so,
information and how can they
so,
help you?
so probably the easiest way, if you want to follow me on Twitter, I'm fairly active on Twitter. So it's at DFS, all uppercase, and then underscore Jason with a capital J. So DFS underscore Jason. And then if you want to go look at the company website, you can hit me up on dfirlabs.com. Or alternatively, you can drop me an email. It's just jason@dfirlabs.com. And if you've got any questions about digital forensics or cybercrime, you're more than welcome to ask. I'm very involved in mentoring and helping develop, new digital forensic practitioners. And I've got lots of people that I'm helping around the world. So if anybody's interested in a career like this, they're more than welcome to reach out to me. I'll happily give them advice, point them in the right direction. I love what I do. It's an awesome profession. I get to catch bad guys and I get to be nerdy at the same time. So it's like a win-win situation for me.
Well, and it's also what we're all doing in the future, isn't it? So you're helping mold the future as well. So thank you very much. And
Awesome.
thank you so much for today. Really fascinating to get an insight into what you do. And I'll be checking out your website, that's for sure.
Awesome. And hopefully we'll chat again at some point in the future.
Oh, sure. Thank you so much. Please do subscribe to Bedroom Forensics, where you can get more information from specialists about a subject that you are interested in, which is obviously forensics, crime scene investigation. Come on back. See you next time.